After the night Kellen discovered my food delivery job, I thought everything between us would become different. Maybe he would look at me with pity in his eyes. Or worse, he would start treating me more carefully, as if I were some fragile person who needed protection. But Kellen didn't do any of that. The next morning in class, when I walked into the lecture hall, he was still sitting in his usual spot. And when he saw me, he simply said, "Sterling, you're 3 minutes late." I sat down. "Are you timing me?" "No. But the professor is talking about the part you explained to me yesterday." I opened my laptop. "Then you should listen carefully." Kellen smiled. "With you sitting next to me, I'm not worried." Everything was still the same as before. Only one small thing had changed. Kellen started watching me more. Not in an uncomfortable, curious way, but in a caring way. One evening in the library while we were studying, Kellen suddenly said, "Sterling, yeah, how many hours do you sleep every day?" I was still typing on my laptop. "I don't know. Roughly 4 or 5. He frowned. "Too little. I'm used to it. No one gets used to 4 hours of sleep." "Ido." Kellen sighed. Then he closed his book. "Let's go eat." I looked up. "Now?" "Yeah. I still have work to do. You've been working for 3 hours already." "I'm fine." "Sterling." His voice dropped a little. "I'm hungry." I looked at him for a few seconds, then sighed. "Fine." We left the library and went to a small restaurant near campus. Not a fancy place, just a regular student burger joint. That surprised me. When we sat down, I asked, "Do you eat here often?" Kellen shrugged. "Sometimes. You don't look like the type who eats burgers at a student diner." "What type do I look like?" "5-star restaurants." He laughed. "Sterling, do you think I live like a prince?" I didn't answer, but in my head, yes, that's exactly what I thought. Kellen looked at me for a moment. Then he said very calmly, "My family is rich." I was a little surprised by how straightforward he was. I figured, but that doesn't mean I have to live like in the movies. I nodded. "Fair enough." Kellen watched me as we waited for our food. "What about you?" "Me? Why did you choose to study economics?" I thought for a second. "Because of money." He frowned. "That's pretty blunt." "I don't have any romantic reasons." I shrugged. "I want a good job, a stable life. I don't want to worry about every single penny like my parents." Kellen was silent for a few seconds. Then he asked, "Have you ever thought about resting?" "I'm resting right now." "I'm serious." "So am I." I looked straight into his eyes. "Kellen, if I stop, I'll lose everything." He didn't say anything else, but his eyes grew very serious. When the food arrived, we started eating. In the middle of it, Kellen suddenly asked, "Sterling, yeah, do you have a boyfriend yet?" I almost choked on my burger. "Why are you asking that?" He shrugged. "Just curious." "I don't have time for that." "That's not an answer." I took a sip of water. "No." Kellen nodded. "What about you?" I asked back. "No." "Really? You're surprised. I thought a lot of people would chase after you." He smiled faintly. "There are." "Then why aren't you dating anyone?" Kellen thought for a moment, then said, "I haven't met the right person yet." That answer sounded so simple, but when he said it, his eyes were looking at me. I felt my throat go dry. The air between us suddenly felt strange. Finally, I broke the silence. "I have to go to work." Kellen checked his watch. "It's 10 at night." "Yeah. I'll drive you." "No need. I have a car. I have a bike." "Sterling, I'm fine." He looked at me for a few seconds, then finally nodded. "Okay." We left the restaurant together. Before we split at the intersection, Kellen called me back. "Sterling, yeah." He stood under the streetlight, looking at me for a long time, then said, "I like talking to you." My heart beat faster again. "We talk all the time." "I mean, I really like it." I didn't know how to answer, because the truth was, I liked it too, a lot. But the closer I got to Kellen, the more scared I became. Scared that if I took one more step, I would fall into a feeling I wasn't supposed to have. Poor boy. A boy from a rich family. The distance between those two worlds wasn't something easy to cross. But the human heart often doesn't listen to reason. After that evening at the burger place, I started to realize something I had always tried to avoid thinking about. Kellen was getting closer to me. Not in an obvious way, but enough for me to feel it. He texted me more often. First, just questions about homework. Then short messages like, "Have you eaten yet?" Or, "Don't stay up too late." One night when I was delivering food close to midnight, my phone buzzed. A message from Kellen. "Sterling, are you still working?" I looked at the screen and smiled. I replied quickly, "Yeah." "Why aren't you sleeping?" The reply came almost immediately. "I'm doing homework. But I figured you were probably out in the cold." I looked up at the empty street. The wind blew through the tall buildings, carrying Seattle's signature chill. "I'm used to it." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, Kellen sent a very short message. "I don't like that." I stopped my bike for a second. "Don't like what?" "You having to struggle like this." I stared at the message for a long time, then typed back, "I'm fine." Took him almost a minute to reply. "I know, but that doesn't mean I have to like it." I didn't know what to say. In the end, I just sent a smiling emoji. But for the rest of my delivery route that night, I kept thinking about his message. A week later, midterms were approaching. The school library was packed with students. Kellen and I spent almost the entire evening there. We sat at our usual spot by the window. It was drizzling outside. The sound of rain tapping on the glass made a steady rhythm. Kellen was reading while I was solving econometrics problems. Around 10 at night, my head started to feel heavy. I rubbed my eyes. Kellen noticed. "Sterling. Yeah. You're about to fall asleep." "I'm not. You just read the same line 3 times. I sighed. "Just a little tired." He closed his book. "Let's go home. I still have." "Sterling." He spoke softly, but it was enough to stop me. "You're not a machine." I looked at him. "Neither are you." "True. But you don't work 3 jobs like I do." Kellen was silent for a few seconds. Then he stood up. "I'll drive you home." "I can walk." "I know." "Then why drive me?" "Because I want to." I looked at him for a moment. Finally, I closed my laptop. Fine. We left the library. It was still drizzling. Kellen opened his familiar black umbrella. That umbrella. The one that had brought us together on the very first night. We walked under the yellow campus lights. The wind blew gently. The smell of wet earth made everything strangely quiet. After a while, Kellen spoke. "Sterling. Yeah. Have you ever thought about the future?" "I think about it every day. I mean, beyond work." I frowned. "I'm not sure I understand." He thought for a moment, then asked, "Have you ever thought about loving someone?" That question made me stop. I looked straight ahead. "No." "Really? I don't have time." Kellen smiled faintly. "You always use that line. Because it's true." He didn't say anything for a few steps. Then he asked, voice lower, "What if you did have time?" My heart beat faster. "I don't know." "Sterling. Yeah. What if someone liked you?" I stopped. Kellen stopped too. Under the umbrella, we were only a few inches apart. I could see his blue eyes clearly in the streetlight. "Who are you talking about?" I asked. Kellen didn't answer right away. He just looked at me for a long time. Then he said softly, "I think you know." The air suddenly went silent. Only the sound of rain remained. I felt my heart pounding so hard it almost hurt. "Why?" I asked. "Why me?" Kellen smiled lightly. "Do you really want the answer?" "Yeah." He looked at me for a long time, then said, "Because you're Sterling." That answer almost made me laugh. It doesn't sound very convincing. For me, it's enough. I turned my face away, because if I kept looking into his eyes, I was afraid I would say what I had been holding back all this time. The truth was, I liked Kellen too. A lot. But I knew one thing clearly. If I stepped into that relationship, then one day, when his world and my world collided, one of us would get hurt, and I wasn't sure I was strong enough to bear it. After that night, everything between me and Kellen became fragile. Not because we avoided each other. On the contrary, we still saw each other every day, still sat next to each other in class, still studied together in the library. But one thing had changed. We both knew it. We knew that what was between us was no longer just friendship. But neither of us said anything more about it. Maybe because we were both waiting for the other person to take the first step. Or maybe we were both scared. One evening I was working at the cafe. It wasn't the fancy place where I had been cheated out of money before. I had quit that job after that night. Now I worked at a smaller cafe near campus. Less money, but at least the owner was kind. Around 10 at night, the door opened. I was wiping tables and didn't notice, until I heard a familiar voice. Sterling. I turned around, and of course, it was Kellen. He stood near the door, wearing a dark coat, hair slightly wet from the rain. I was surprised. What are you doing here? He shrugged. I was just passing by. Seattle is huge, and you just happened to pass by this exact cafe? Coincidence. I looked at him suspiciously, but eventually smiled. I'm working. I can see that. He glanced at my apron and added, You look good in it. I don't know if that's a compliment or sarcasm. It's a compliment. I pointed to a table by the window. Sit down. I'll serve you. Kellen sat. When I brought his coffee, he looked at me for a moment. I've never seen you work like this before. I do it all the time. But this is the first time I've seen it. I set the cup down. So, what's the impression? Kellen didn't answer right away. He just looked at me, then said, You take everything very seriously. I need the money. Not just because of the money. Then why? He shrugged. Because that's who you are. That sentence made me a little embarrassed. I turned away to wipe another table. But a few minutes later, when I came back, Kellen was still watching me. What? I asked. I'm thinking. Thinking what? That I want to take you somewhere. I frowned. Now? No. When you're free. I'm rarely free. Then whenever you're not working. I thought for a second. Sunday. The whole day. Afternoon. Kellen smiled. Then Sunday. Where? Secret. I laughed. Sounds suspicious. You can say no. I looked at him for a few seconds, then said, Okay. Kellen's eyes brightened a little. Sunday came faster than I expected. That afternoon, I met Kellen in front of the school gate. He was leaning against a shiny black car. I looked at the car, then at him. Don't tell me this is your car. It is. How old are you? 22. Too young to drive a car like this. Kellen laughed. Get in. We drove out of the city center. About 30 minutes later, Kellen stopped on a coastal road. Before us was the silver-gray sea of Seattle under a cloudy sky. The wind blew hard. Waves crashed against the rocky shore. I stepped out of the car. It's beautiful. Kellen stood beside me. You've never been here before? No. Really? I rarely leave the city. We walked along the shore for a while. Neither of us spoke. Only the sound of wind and waves. Finally, Kellen said, Sterling. Yeah. I want to ask you something. What? He turned to face me. Very seriously. If I told you I like you, for real. My heart pounded. Not as a friend. The sea wind ruffled his hair. What would you say? I looked down at the gray water, then back at him. The truth was right on the tip of my tongue. But I knew, if I said it, everything would change forever. I would say, I began. Kellen waited, his eyes full of hope. I took a deep breath, then said the words I knew would hurt both of us. Kellen, we shouldn't. The smile on his face froze. Shouldn't what? You and me. A heavy silence fell between us. Why? He asked softly. I looked straight into his eyes. Because we live in two different worlds. The sea wind blew stronger, carrying the cold of the ocean. Kellen and I stood facing each other on that coastal road under the vast gray sky. I had just said what I had kept inside for weeks. We live in two different worlds. The words sounded clear, but when I spoke them, they hurt more than I expected. Kellen didn't speak right away. He just looked at me. His eyes weren't angry. They weren't furious. Just disappointed. After a long while, he asked, "Sterling, yeah, do you really believe that?" I swallowed. Yes. Then what do you think everything that's happened between us these past few months was? Friendship. My answer was too quick. Too stiff. I knew I was lying. Kellen knew it too. He smiled faintly, but it wasn't a happy smile. You're terrible at this. I'm just being realistic. No. You're running away. That sentence made me go quiet. Kellen took a step closer. Sterling, do you think I care about you because of your money? I didn't say that. Then what are you afraid of? I turned my face away, because if I looked into his eyes right now, I wouldn't be able to hold on to my decision. Kellen, I'm asking you. His voice was still calm, but there was a slight tremble in it. I took a deep breath, then told the truth. I'm scared. Scared of what? Scared that one day, your family will look at me and think I'm just a poor guy taking advantage of their son. Kellen frowned. I don't care what they think. But I do. Sterling, I've spent my whole life proving I'm not useless. My voice dropped. And I don't want to become a story people whisper behind your back. The wind blew past. We stood in silence. After a moment, Kellen said very softly, "Do you think I'm so weak that I can't protect the person I like?" I looked at him, and right then I realized the most dangerous thing. Kellen's eyes. They were so sincere they almost made me waver. Sterling, he said, you like me. I didn't answer. Don't lie. I sighed. Yeah. The word left my lips as light as the wind, but it made my heart feel as heavy as stone. Kellen took another step. The distance between us was now only an arm's length. Then why are you still refusing? Because liking isn't enough. He looked at me for a very long time, then asked, so what is enough? I had no answer. Or maybe I didn't dare say it. Finally, I turned around. I think we should go back. Kellen didn't stop me. We walked back to the car in silence. On the way back to Seattle, neither of us spoke. Only the sound of the engine and the rain that had started falling lightly on the windshield. When the car stopped in front of my dorm, I unbuckled my seatbelt. Thanks for today.